아까 발자국 소리 들었지 뭐.
So, bro, James can't come today because he
진짜?
has PTA, and unfortunately it's at night.
Sounds stressful.
비지.
Is he there alone or is he going with his wife? Oh, okay, that's good.
잘 지냈어?
네.
이거 먹을래?
네.
속이 좀 안 좋았는데 이걸 먹으면 괜찮아질 것 같아서 먹고 있어.
오.
D를 먹었는데 소화가 안 되는 거야. Do you know capsule? 이렇게 캡슐 된 거. 그게 나는 그거 먹으면 좀 이상하게 소화가 안 되더라. 자기 하나씩 갖고 오는 거 이거. 거기서 델리 가게 아저씨 같아. 이거 하나씩 갖다 주는. 오늘 종이는 못 온대?
네. 바빠서.
전화는 돼?
문자해요.
문자해?
Okay. So we were on Moses.
맞아.
고맙습니다.
네. 지난번에도 모세 못했잖아.
네.
프리페러에이션. 모세를 만나는 게 이렇게 힘들어. 오늘도 다른 이야기를 한번 1시간 동안 해볼까?
Yeah, I figure that's one because this is Bible study. So it's whatever
Right.
Oh, I have something I'm
Question.
curious about. What's the how should a priest feel about tattoos?
I mean, Christians, we shouldn't get it. And the reason is it's not. Well, first of all, our body's not our body, so we can't. Like if people understood this about our body, then the whole the group of Christians who permit or allow transgenders. There was a recent article that I mean, they sort of summarized it wrong, but Catholics are now able to baptize transgenders. I don't know if you saw that article, but technically speaking, and I'm pretty sure this is what the Catholic Church was trying to say, which is if they're in repentance, and if there's a way to if there's a way to change back or detransition, then in a state of repentance, as they're trying their best to, go back into the natural order of things, because they're in repentance, they can be baptized. I'm pretty sure that's the way they meant to say it. But the way it sounded like it came out was, even if you're not repentant, you can still get baptized in the Catholic Church. I'm pretty sure that's not the way they meant it, but it's the way they came out. So the reason why they say that is they think our bodies are not. I mean, in the Catechism they say our bodies are not our own, but for one reason or another, pragmatically they think it is. So the first thing is our body's not our own; it belongs to God. So it should be used only for those things that glorify God. Well, water tattoos. It's any markings on the body. You could say that's not. I mean, so there's the history of what tattoos are, and then the things that tattoos signify. Historically, tattoos are a marking of for the dead.
Dead? Marking of the dead?
Marking for the dead.
Or the ill, right?
Not the ill, but definitely the dead.
I know in history they'd mark people with leprosy, for example, with tattoos.
I mean, maybe for in other cultures, but so
Yeah.
yeah. So this is Leviticus 19, verse 28. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am the Lord. So, like historical, culturally speaking, it was a marking similar to a cutting. It was some sort of a mark or indication that you're making for like the deceased, for the dead. And for the dead here means like necromancy kind of stuff. Or, I mean, it's talking about necromancy, but if somebody says, "Oh, it's not talking about necromancy," like that's just a way too specific. Okay, like the most general when you say for the dead, like what could you mean? Maybe in their memory, right? It's basically saying don't make any markings, even for their memory, is what it's saying. Then, if you take it like the broadest interpretation, but historically, it's been interpreted as a necromancy. But so that's the first. The first thing is our body doesn't belong to us. The second thing is historically speaking, markings of the body. Word for some sort of practice of necromancy, or broadly speaking, remembrance of the dead. Some people go, Jesus Christ, the law has been taken away. So whether or not you do or do not get a law, or whether or not you do or do not get a print marking, has no effect. It has no moral effect anymore. What they would say. There's no moral. There's no moral consequence of like getting a tattoo. Is what even modern Reformed would say. Whenever we come to these like not sensitive but contentious issues where people seem like they want to practice it, which is why they're trying to justify it. Whenever we come to those issues, you make an analogy and then see if the analogy holds. You create a form of art, or you draw a painting or something. Some stranger comes up to you or comes up to your art, and they just desecrate it. They just like put their own markings on there. What's that about? What are you doing? This is a form of art. Oh, that's the Old Testament stuff, right? Like that's even if that was legal. Let's say you live in a country where that's illegal. Still, you'd be like, hey, that's not right. It might be legal, but it's not right because I'm the creator of this thing. I'm the owner of it. And just because you have the legal right to, just because you have the legal side, just because you have the law on your side to desecrate, the thing that I created, it doesn't mean it's right. Does that make sense?
Because I think about, say, hairstyle, and how hairstyle can be changed, according to the person's whim. Like, kind of.
But is it permanent?
It's not permanent, but also tattoos aren't permanent. You can get them removed. Right?
As far as I know, they still leave a scar. Because the whole point of it is, it's a inked scar. As far as I know, maybe I don't know what tattoos are, but that's how I understand them.
So temporary tattoos are no issue.
Yeah, they're an issue.
That desire itself kind of simple.
So the desire itself. So the desire. So when we compare it to haircuts are necessary only because your hair keeps growing. So it's not a temporary thing you're doing. But let's say you go, well, I want to make it permanent. I want to be bald for the rest of my life. So I'm gonna,
remove the follicles.
Yeah, remove all the follicles and et cetera, et cetera. I would say that's not right. I would say that's not right.
예수님을 뭐 우리가 몰랐을 때 그냥 한 사람도 있잖아. 그렇게 해가지고 크리스찬 된 사람들 되게 많거든요. 근데 그런 사람들은 또 그거를 지우진 못하고 지우는 데까지는 지우더라고요. 근데 또 하나의 어떤 자기의 어떤 또 상처로 이렇게 남겨둔 사람 몰랐을 때 하는 거는 나는 그거는 하나님 이해하시지. 몰랐을 때는.
But why would you think that?
그럼 어떻게 이왕 했는데 그쵸?
Then you have to try to get it off, right?
트라이 오프를 하는
To the best of your abilities, yeah.
트라이 오프를
Right?
하는데 어떤 거는 또 잘 안 된다고 그러더라고.
근데 할 수 없는 건 할 수 없는 거지만, for instance, like, because what you're trying to do, you're trying to remove a scar. So of course it's not going to be 100%, you know.
마음이 그렇게 하려고 하는 거구나.
But what Christians can't allow for is, if they're consistent Christians, what we can't allow for is, if it's, so let's say the act itself is not unrighteous. Let's say, for the sake of the argument, let's just say it's not even, you know, let's say it's allowable. But is it right? Yeah, God allows you, but is it good for whatever holy form you're supposed to exercise in this world? Is it good for that form? If it's not, then you're bordering, even though it might not be sin at that time or whatever it is, because of the legality of it from the Bible, you're bordering on that. Your fence, kind of like fence sitting there, and that in itself is a dangerous mindset to have, because the whole point of holiness is to have a vector towards God. It's a direction. So the fact that your direction is like sitting on a fence, like something is wrong with that mindset. If that makes sense.
Because I'm wondering also, I was thinking about, would it be more Christian to have, so in a lot of science fiction, you know, instead of having kind of meals in this way that are, you know, tasteful and flavorful, they'll have just blocks of flavorless, you know, things that don't have any taste. Would that be more Christian to consume? Because having tasty food detracts from kind of worshiping God.
So pleasure itself is not detracted from God. God created pleasure as a taste of heaven. So by the pleasures we have, we know what heaven, but by faith, we have an idea of what heaven would be like. It's because despite the sinful body, we still feel pleasure. And this is why in my mind, Christianity is the only religion that makes sense of like all of this. So you have this thing called pleasure. Before Adam sinned, you would not have this thing called pain. And we can sort of like deduce this in many ways, but one of the ways is anytime somebody's in pain, like let's say there was no such thing as religion, then pain can't exist, because you need something before you have another thing, you know, of that thing. In other words,
what does that mean?
So whenever somebody's in, let's say somebody's in pain, or let's put it this way: somebody falls off a cliff and he breaks his skull and he's in a lot of pain. Pardon me. In many cultures, people look at that and go, "That guy's being punished for something," right? And we go, "Well, why would you say that?" And people have this automatic reaction, like, "Well, because by chance, such and such thing happened, and he's suffering for it." Right? So we all have this innate sense of like suffering being a form of punishment for something. How do we know that? Let's say your kid doesn't listen to you, or you're trying to teach your kids, you know, to be good people, but they're not. Some kind of punishment is how every culture in the entire history of the world responds to teaching kids to be better people. Right? So that means every culture understands, from the history of the world I'm talking about, there's no culture that rewards bad behavior, right, to fix whatever they're doing, because they innately understand punishment is a form of deterring whatever that thing, you know, they don't want that happening. So every culture then understands like suffering is actually a form of punishment in some degree. Where did that notion even come from? So if there was no God, Right? If there was no God, the whole notion of pain shouldn't exist.
Because it's associated with preparing bad behavior.
No, because pain is it's an innate thing that every sinner understands as a form of punishment. There's no animal who goes, oh, I fell down a cliff, I'm being punished for something. No animal thinks in that way. There's no animal like a bear fighting a tiger, like the bear kills the tiger or the tiger kills him. At no point do any of the people any of the animals that are suffering go, oh, I met this tiger and suffered this fate because I'm being punished for something. No animal thinks in those terms. How do we know? Because they end up in a similar situation later on down the road, right? Because they're not thinking in those categories.
So is pain itself associated with
suffering is, and then pain is a derivative of whatever suffering it is. It's one form of suffering. Pain is, because depression is another form, right? So, right, and the idea is, well, what is this thing called suffering? It's every person made in God's image innately understands suffering is a form of punishment, and that's how God reveals His order in the universe. So in other words, like God's holiness is the foundation for what order is supposed to be. Every order in this entire universe is derived from God's foundation. So when we see order, something about God's holiness is being revealed in that order. Whether it's mathematics, whether it's physics, whether it's gravity, so-called gravity.
Wait, so in a world without God,
right,
would there be pain or would there be no pain?
There would be physical sensations, but we wouldn't think of it as pain.
Okay.
That whole notion would just not exist.
So is that pointing to
the fact that we see it as suffering points to there's a moral order to the universe, is what that means.
So cognitive reasoning is pointing to God's order?
It's not cognitive though. It's a moral reasoning, because suffering is a moral term. It's not an intellectual term. Suffering, it's a moral term.
And you're saying suffering is not the same as the physical sensation of pain.
Yeah, and the way we know that is animals maim each other all the time. They're animals are victims to whatever the earth, whatever the ground, earthquakes, whatever. They're all victims to these things. They're victims to what we would call nature. But there's no animal who takes that and go, oh, this is a form of suffering. No animal does that. They just see it as some sort of random thing that just happens. It's a stimuli, and they just react to it. That's it.
They feel suffering?
No, they don't feel suffering. Animals can't suffer, contrary to popular belief.
Or pain?
They can feel pain, but they don't see it as pain the way we think of it as pain. They think of pain just something to get away from, not a form of suffering.
Isn't that because they don't have developed brains?
It doesn't have to do with developed brains. So
made like that.
Yeah, so it has nothing to do with whether or not they have the brain processing power. There's computers, you can say computers can have especially with AI now, computers can have these kinds of brain power, so to speak. But you need to have an awareness of some sort of morality in order to have the concept of suffering. So image of God bears, because we're made in spirit, have that moral capacity, which is why angels, despite not having a body, despite not having a physical form, also understand what morality is, because they're made in spirit, or as spirit. Well, the only other creatures other than angels that are made in spirit is human beings. So only us two categories of beings have this idea of what suffering is. Does that make sense?
Because I think that that kind of segues into another question I have, which is,
but does that make sense about the whole pain thing? So
I used to associate pain as the same as suffering, but
it's a form of suffering, but it's not. Yeah, suffering is like a punishment. Pain is just pain. It's just a physical sensation. It's no different than somebody tickling you and you're feeling uncomfortable from it. You still try to get away, but Some people would say that's painful, but most people would say that's just uncomfortable. You know.
What is pregnant delivery suffering? Pain.
Yeah, that's a form of suffering. Yeah. I mean, like I said, but that's the whole point. Is in the Bible, it clearly lays out like why the woman suffers. It's a form of punishment. See, in the Bible, it's very clear what that is.
So before Adam sinned, there was
no pain. There was no pain.
There was no pain. So
No suffering. Because there's no suffering, you can't have a form of pain. Because there was no suffering.
So pain is derived from suffering?
Yeah, it's a form. So let's say suffering is the thing that we understand to be like a punishment or some sort of whatever. So here's what I would think. Let's say a tree fell on Adam. First of all, I think his limbs would have regrown. I think that's how perfect the DNA. I mean, we have like lizards regrowing their tails, right? Pretty sure all that like Adam was able to do as well. Because then it would make sense why that plus, let's say he lost his arm, it would eventually grow back, but not through pain. Maybe slightly uncomfortable or something like somebody being tickled, right? Or pins and needles, maybe. You know what I mean?
Because what do you draw from to think that there was no pain before there was sin?
So people in hell right now, they don't have a body, but they're suffering, right? And my question would be, well, they're suffering, but do they feel pain in hell right now? Well, the Bible describes it as like torment. Sounds painful, right? But they don't have a body, or they don't have, you know what I mean? But then that's because of God's wrath.
I remember there was one.
And this isn't like so here I'm speaking on my own terms, and because that's a very difficult question.
Yeah.
So like but so what I'm trying to be consistent with like what it would have been in paradise compared to what's going on now in hell, and then what will happen in the lake of fire later. Just trying to be consistent with like the how the Bible presents that.
And then, what do you make of was it Jonas who? Well, anyway, there was this wealthy person in hell, and he was asking
Lazarus,
someone in heaven to give him a finger. Was
Lazarus was
Thank you.
Lazarus was with Abraham.
So how is that guy able to? Was he feeling thirst, or
a form of thirst?
But then,
because he doesn't
feel thirst without a body.
I mean, first, so that's why it's a form of thirst. You know what I mean? It's not like a physical sensation that.
Oh, okay.
It's a form. We don't know what it is, but it's whatever that guy understood that feeling to be in hell, whatever that feeling was, it reminded him of what being thirsty felt like when he had a body. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It just reminded him of that.
오늘도 모세는 다음 주에.
Sure, that's fine.
아니.
But yeah, so in my mind, like, and because of that, there's only one religion that makes a clear distinction between how did pain and suffering and misery enter into this world. And even in the catechisms of the Reform, we say sin is the cause of pain and suffering, or suffering and misery is the source of it is sin. So in my mind, like, it's clear. Things like this become very clear if you're a consistent Christian and you follow like the Reformed, explanation of like what's going on. Otherwise, like, I don't understand, like, philosophically, you shouldn't even have physical sensation of pleasure. Getting back to that thing. Physical pleasure is not a wrong thing. It's a taste of what heaven is like. What that means is pain is the other side of that, which is it's a taste of what hell would be. Right? So the idea is pain is there to drive us away from unbelief. It's there to drive us away from that. And then pleasure is here to drive us toward the gospel. And the issue is when we become lovers of pain more, or lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. That's the way Paul phrases it. Lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. So everything has its own order, its place, and pleasure has its own place, which is why, sexual pleasure has its place in marriage, a marriage covenant between one man and one wife. And any way to try to attain that sexual pleasure outside of marriage, goes against that natural order then. Because the point of it is to, not only be contained in that marriage covenant, but also have a goal or tell us towards having bearing children. That's like the way it's directed. So
because that is a symbol of Jesus Christ가 신랑이고 우리가 신부잖아요.
Yeah.
그거를 express하기 위해서 one man,
kind of, yeah.
one woman,
Yeah.
marriage를
Yeah,
하죠.
And then the whole pleasure part of it is what the consummation at the end of the age. Not
adultery.
Consummation. So at the end, at the last day when we do meet Jesus Christ, the pleasure we would feel in a new body, is like the parallel for, like the marriage pleasure. Yeah. So it would be like exponential when Jesus Christ comes back.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't only be a physical sensation; it would be a spiritual sensation where we go.
It's like a shadow.
Yeah.
Pleasure now.
Yeah.
Shadow
The thing we're feeling here, yeah. And then when we understand that, that's why like a lot of the stuff we do here, it's like. So, for instance, and I'm not trying to pick on people. I'm just saying, on a Sunday, we're not supposed to work because, or use money because, it's only a shadow of the things that are here, and they all point towards the future. So, like, why would you give up a future glory or a future reward for keeping the Sabbath holy for like $9.95, McDonald's meal? Like, why would you do that? It's because we don't really, we can't. It's because we're too focused on the pleasure here, rather than like what Paul says, lovers of God, being lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. So
sometimes you can imagination. That's why. Right now, pleasure is more.
But it's all a shadow. Yeah,
easily feel.
It's real, but it's a real shadow. It's not the full version of it. I feel like I'm rambling. This is making sense.
Oh, yeah.
That's why we need the faith, right? Because we never experienced about heavenly real pleasure yet.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
why.
So we have a taste of it here, but that's it. Only a taste of it.
Another thing I'm curious about is people can have kids, and those kids are born with a consciousness that Christians define as can identify as a consciousness. How is that different from, say, 1,000 years into the future, when a person can, say, 3D print a completely kind of
like functioning
humanoid robot? Because I don't think Christians would identify that thing to have a consciousness.
Yeah, so if all human beings are, it's just biology, right? If that's what human beings are, we would just be animals. But the definition of a human being is not that. The definition is it has a spirit there, right? So, yeah, maybe eventually people will come up with brain patterns, 3D printing robots with AI or whatever.
There's this process where they can replicate a human brain,
right,
layer by layer, and it even replicates memories.
Right.
So, but that wouldn't have a spirit, even though.
It wouldn't have a spirit.
By any observation,
it wouldn't have a spirit because it's not made in God's image. Yeah, it's really that, like, it really is that simple. And at that time, the only people who's gonna sound crazy are gonna be the Christians, because everybody else is gonna say, these robots think like us, they talk like us, they look like us. How can they not be human? And only the Christians are gonna say, because they're not made in God's image.
Even if Christians can't differentiate those
we can't. God can, and we have to. Yeah, so we have to always but we have to always remain in reality of the situation, which is we might be fooled, but God isn't fooled by these things. Angels are only spirit, and they're not made in God's image. Create the other creation from this earth, visible things. The creatures here are only body. so it's not made in God's image. Human beings are the only one that has a spirit and a body, and we're made in God's image. So let's say there's a computer that, or let's say there's a future robot, whatever it is, that has memories, that has all these things. You even ask it moral questions. Is it right to do X, Y, Z thing? To that robot, all it is just a random firing of, not random, but it's a programmed firing of its like electron, whatever that thing is. It's not deriving those conclusions from somewhere else. Whereas what we were saying for human beings is our decisions, our choices, our morality are actually coming from somewhere, and our physical body is like a receiver of sorts. It's not only a receiver, but being a receiver is a significant part. So biology does affect the way we think, because if we're tired, of course, we're more prone to sin, etc., etc. But you can just think of it in that way. Like our brain is mostly like a receiver for like the things that our spirit actually is thinking.
But is that true? How can that be true when when there are documented cases of people who were found in the wild, raised by wolves, and they just behave like a wolf?
Well, you just asked. So here's the thing: do they have the faculty to have these moral consciousness? So, and this goes back to unfortunately, our modern culture doesn't do philosophy anymore, but the essence of something is very, very important. The essence of something. So when you're trying to define something as a human being, are you trying to exclude morality out of it in the first place? Or does a human being, by definition, has to have the moral faculties? So for instance, let's say there's like a genetically problemed person or something, so they don't have like arms or something. Can we still call them human beings? Well, yeah, because the essence of who they are is the accidents of what they are isn't, but the essence of who they are is. Because, and we go, well, how can we say a human without two arms is a human being? Well, because there's an essence to what that human being is, and the essence is it has to have a spirit and a body, and then the spirit has one. The spirit itself is like the part of the essence of what a human being is, so it plays a part in the whole. So does the body, right? So we already have these if we have that kind of understanding of what a human is, then we understand the essence of a human being is not determined by the accidents or the manifestation of that, which is without arms in that case. The fact that it didn't have arms doesn't negate the person being a human being. It's just a human being who doesn't have two arms. That's it.
The reason I kind of think this way, where I think spirituality or having the ability to have ethics or morals.
Yeah.
Because the way I think that way is that it's something that's learned, is because one part of it is how in the Bible parents have a duty to teach their kids about Christianity. Because I understood that as pointing to how without education from an early age, that sort of moral facility wouldn't be developed.
So that would be the falling short way of thinking about it. It doesn't go to the full extent of like what that means. So human beings are always a growing being. To some degree, they're always growing. Even when they grow old, they're still growing old. They're growing constantly. Teaching the children about Christianity and all this stuff is not even about Christianity. It's teaching them who the real God is and the actual order of the universe, which is ordered by God's holiness.
They didn't receive any kind of affection.
Right.
And they're reared by maids who were only allowed to feed them and clean them. And they all just died because they didn't receive the physical care. But because I see that as a moral facility that's completely just that needs to be educated.
Right.
Because otherwise, the babies would be fine.
No.
Because they're receiving food and.
No. Yeah. So, and again, this only makes sense in the Christian sense. How did, even if you try to talk evolution-wise, how did people develop evolutionarily if babies can't survive on their own, unlike their animal, whatever counterparts? Not even counterparts. Like a deer knows how to walk or learns how to walk as soon as it's like born. An elephant learns how to walk as soon as it's born. But people don't have that. So how is it that human
I
beings
think all mammal infants need nurturing or they die. I think it's
maybe?
especially reptiles that the babies just kind of.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not, versed. I'm not well. I don't know what that world is like or what the state of it. All I'm saying is, calves when they're born, they immediately learn how to walk, and they're only like hours old. Dogs, I had like 5 dogs, so I know like they immediately learn how to crawl. Yes, they need nurturing, but human babies take years, months to do that.
Have you seen a kangaroo fetus or a newborn kangaroo?
Right, they have that pouch. Right, I'm not saying I'm not saying human beings are. What I'm trying to get at is like, there's all these animals that have that kind of. If you're talking evolutionary, like they've developed ways to, take care of their young. Like evolutionary ways, if you're talking that way. Kangaroos have pouches, etc., etc. Where's the human pouch? How does the human, like hold its baby? A monkey knows how to hold on to its mom. So how did the human species survive so long? If evolution is true. And I would say evolution is not true. So
because it would be backwards if
right.
evolution was true.
Right. No, there would be no human beings that would ever exist because a baby needs several years before they can even learn to walk or even crawl. Several months at least. So and this is that's beside the point though. But so if we start to, so we go like, okay, then what's the whole? How can we say what is or is not a human being? Well, human being naturally are supposed to have this faculty for reasoning, not just any kind of reasoning, moral reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they don't have it now, and the fact that they might get impaired, doesn't stop the fact that the essence of what the human being is has that capability. So, for instance, when we see, let's say, I think you might have missed some of the sermons on identity, like what constitutes identity. So this is from Helen Keller. Also, have you read her biography, autobiography, Helen Keller? Man. So she's the deaf and mute, person who couldn't, deaf and blind. So Helen Keller described in her autobiography her life before she learned the words as like just this. There was no history. It was just a blob of like emotional things that just happened, and it's not ordered in any way. But once she started learning about words, that's when, and not just words, but words, and then through those words learned what language is when her thoughts became ordered. And that's the whole point of what language is. Language develop your identity because they make sense of the world that you live in. That's what language does. That's what grammar does. Grammar puts order to words. So even if you have a sentence, the grammar tells you what parts these symbolic things play to help you make sense of like the thing you just thought of. Because these are just concepts at the moment. And you need something to order that. So once you have that order, with that order, you can understand or order, because that's what understanding means. You're ordering everything else that's coming into you, like through your senses, even propositional, like in your own thoughts. You're beginning to order those things through the ability that you have. Well, where did you get that faculty from?
God.
Not just God, but your essence. God has for human beings that essence. He gave human beings that essence to understand and order the world by language. That's the essence of what a human being is, to able to recognize patterns, recognize that order of God, and then say, aha, there's some sort of mind behind that order. They recognize that.
Based on pure observation, just pure superficiality, robots display the same thing.
No, but you can't say. So the thing is, you can't say based on pure superficiality, because when you say robots, you're defining a robot in a certain way. You see what I mean? Like, so on the front, it seems like you're being sort of like neutral about the word robot. But if you think about why you use the word robot instead of a human being, is because you're trying to make a point, not make a point, but you're trying to get across this idea, like a thought experiment, basically. There's this thing called a human being. And then is it possible to emulate this human being or simulate the things that a human being does or expresses apart from the essence of what a human being is? To which I'm saying, yeah, you can. That's what a simulation is. That's what a robot is. It simulates those things. But it's a simulation. That's the point. It's not the real thing. It's a simulation of that.
But without the knowledge of knowing that this seemingly sentient being is a simulation,
Right.
there'd be no way to tell.
There'd be no reason to tell the difference.
Okay.
So yeah, there would be no way to tell. Let's say if you're only speaking about, let's say the Terminators are real, right? And they have this, living material over endoskeleton, et cetera, living tissue over. Do you see the Terminator movies?
No.
Yeah. So let's say there's Terminators are real. Then you say, well, you can't tell the difference between a Terminator and like a human being. That's true. But then if you're getting away from the essence of what a human being is, why does that matter?
Because it's already established that it doesn't have the essence of a human being, so it's asking the question.
Or I would ask you, like, why it matters that you're unable to tell the difference between a robot with a human flesh and a human being from the outside. Why does that question matter? If we're already defining things like, like let's say let's say the essence of what a human being was not, or spirit had no part in that. If we're already starting from that, then my question is why would it matter? Why would it matter that we're able to say there would be no difference? Why does that nuance matter in your thought experiment? Like, why would it matter? It's kind of like
I'm
this.
just asking because if there's a future where people can't tell, say it wouldn't be a sin for someone to baptize who they thought they was a human being.
No. Okay.
Because from the beginning, they thought
they didn't know it was a
misconception. And so it'd be the same case for, say, aliens.
Okay. If there were.
If there were, is it a Christian's place to say that these alien beings have the Holy Spirit or not?
Yeah, it's a Christian's place to say the essence of what makes human beings is being made in God's image, which means it has a body and a spirit. And those body and spirit reflect God's glory or God's holiness in an ordered way, a very specifically ordered way. Angels have a spirit, but they're not created after God's image. There are no aliens, and I can say that with a full, authority. I can demonstrate how, like,
wait, how can you say that when you're not omniscient?
I don't have to be omniscient. You don't have to be omniscient to know zero can't be divided, or anything can't be divided by zero. You don't have to be omniscient to know that. It's just reasoning. Not the same reason, but
isn't reasoning
and reality?
Isn't reasoning, despite how foolproof it might be, still subject to change?
2 + 2 will always be 4 yesterday, today, tomorrow, and except for Stephen Hawking's black hole, everywhere at all times, simultaneously. That's a law of God that can't change. And that's because he created all things by his word, and God's word is infallible. It's infallible. It's unable to change. And I can't really go into details here because there's not enough time, but this notion of space that we have doesn't exist. Not in reality. It's actually this. I can prove it. There's people who already proved it before me. But
so the moon landings,
No. The moon's not even solid.
It's not. Is it made of cheese?
Not cheese, but how is it you can see on a very clear winter day? Try to see if you can see through the moon. If the background is blue, and especially in the morning, like there's the sun is like here, maybe around like 9. The sun is still here, but the moon is like starting to fade away. And then see if you can see through the moon. Like get a camera and try to zoom in on it.
Can't that be light refraction?
Do you know what the moon is made out of?
Well,
Nobody knows. Nobody knows what the. So we're just making up stuff now. We're just like nobody knows what the moon is made out of, but everybody's saying, "Oh, but it can be reflective of something." But that's a huge assumption we're making here.
so anything short of Elon Musk coming to you and saying we're going to give you the opportunity to go to space, would you
Go to space and land on the moon, pick a rock back, and then with that rock, figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there are samples brought back from the moon.
I mean, they say they're samples from the moon, but it's just the same as Earth stuff. It's like, so here's a question for you. If it's the same stuff that, you find in Earth, do you find in Earth where things are reflective? No. Why do they assume the moon is? You see what I mean? It's like these stupid logic stuff that they're trying to convince us of. Anyway, it's like I said, if you actually try to understand what they're trying to make you believe, the whole point of it is to make sure you don't. It's called a paradigm shift. They're trying to change the foundation from how the Bible says the world was created to something else, so that now this whatever comes out from here, which is like the rest of the Bible, is impossible to believe or take it as a it's impossible.
So you believe it's kind of a false sky?
The sky's real. Space is not what we're thinking of. It's a whatever that space is, it's not the way they're describing it. It can't be.
So what do you understand space to be?
Never observed it. Nobody knows.
Okay.
How do we know we never observed it? There's this thing called the Van Allen radiation belt, and nothing's gone past that, ever.
Around the Earth?
Around the Earth, but right before you get into space. So in the upper ionosphere, whatever they call that. It's called Van Allen radiation belt. Nothing ever passed through it from Earth. Nothing.
But can't that also be a misconception?
What do you mean?
Because you weren't, you, I, nor anyone was there to see nothing go past.
No, that was NASA's own admission. And then, like I said, it's not just one thing. It's a series of things. It's one of those things where, you have a smoking gun. You have a guy on the ground. He's bleeding out. There's a bullet inside of him. Looking at the situation, you can do certain things like a gun went off. He has a bullet inside him from that gun. The gun is smoking. It's most likely, there's a series of things you can sort of guess from that. But that's beyond, the scope of what we're talking about here. If they are, we can blatantly say, unless their origin came from human beings, it's not possible for them to have a Holy Spirit or whatever spirit that emulates the image of God to any degree. Because the image of God is a very particular kind of creation. That's the point of the Bible, is to say there's all this creation, but there's a special creation called the image bearers of God.
And there's no possibility of another Bible being out in the
No possible way. Because now we're not talking about Christianity anymore. We're just talking about, or we're not talking about consistent Christianity anymore. We're talking about modernism, which is